This program was produced by and first broadcast on Radio Hawke's Bay, your community access media station. Thanks to New Zealand On Air for making this type of programming possible.
Hey there, it's Michelle from the flip side, the fun side, the sun side of life. Welcome to the inaugural broadcast of Michelle Moments. Welcome to Michelle Moments. This is going to be a broadcast where we send knowledge, empowerment, knowledge currency, positive energy, understanding of life experiences out to all of you out there on the airwaves who are currently following Radio Hawke's Bay. And the reason why this is important to you, because as we enter into a season of troubling times and difficulties, some things that we can control, others we cannot, it's always important to find an energy flow, a vibrancy of life, a moment where you can find coping skills to help you pause for a moment, understand what's happening for you, and find a way to move through that difficulty without staying in it very long. Let me give you a brief history about me, Michelle. I am a native of New Zealand. I have spent the last 35 years living in the United States. And while being here, my culture, who I am, who I was to become, all came along with me. I have experienced some of life's most difficult, disheartening, if you want to call it, tragedies. But for me, when I was in it, they were tragedies. The way I see them now is gifts of growth, where I got to be in the growth zone, learn to understand myself, figure out how I was going to live through life, through those experiences, and what information was I going to take with me on my next journey. To give you an idea of some of those experiences, let me say this. In simplified terms, without going into it too much, I can say this. I have buried 2 babies. The first time that it happened, I said a prayer and said, God, please don't let me go through this again. And when I went through it again, I knew that the reason I went through it for the first time was so that I could hold up my husband in his grief process when I went through it the second time and be a strength. Unfortunately, that strength only lasted so long because the pain of the grief of losing another child took over my life. My perspective, the lens through which I lived through in that time of my life was not wanting to be around. And that's when my first life moment with health was introduced, and I went through a serious depression. Depression's not something that we as a society have often talked about. In fact, it's like cancer. It's a whisper. It's something we don't talk about. And it's all in your head. Unfortunately, the truth of my life experiences is that depression is very real. It's either brought on by circumstances that are out of your control, that your body just says, I've had enough, I cannot go on, or you have other internal or external circumstances that bring you depression as an illness like chickenpox, or measles, mumps, rubella, diabetes. Depression is an illness, it's unseen. And there are many who go through depression and are not heard and are not seen and are not understood. Well, I've lived through a major depression, and suicide was very much a part of my thought process because I no longer wished to live. My life energy, my soul energy was no longer present to my life. One day, in the middle of a serious depression, I received a language that caused me to stop and think for a moment. It was not loving, it was not supportive, it was challenging my thought process. I'm grateful for what was said because it gave me the opportunity to say to myself, wait a minute, why can't I get off of where I'm at? Why am I really stuck here? What am I going to do with myself? And how long do I want to stay in this place? And it had been over a year, this serious depression. This food for thought gave me time to reflect on my son who I lost, who became an anchor for a sense of positivity to move away from the depression and find a source of hope, a source of light and love for myself sufficient that I wanted to belong here on earth, that I wanted to belong to life, and that life had a lot to offer me. I'm so grateful for that experience because it gave me the opportunity to see myself in a way that I wasn't seeing myself before, and that there was hope and that there is a way to get through it. I wouldn't say to those of you out there to not go seek professional help, because it's important to do that on your journey and not to ignore those opportunities. They, in tandem with your own thought process and personal empowerment, can help you work through the concerns that are very serious related to depression. Many, many years later, my next opportunities to live through life were things like almost becoming homeless, losing a job. Those aren't little things. Those are things that we can sometimes battle ourselves with, being a negative conduit to not love and appreciate who we are, and that we break ourselves down little by little, that we're not enough, that nobody wants us, and that somehow that experience means something so very negative. Often we teach ourselves those skill sets to cope with what's going on, because it's very difficult to see ourselves in that smudgy mirror for who we are, that we have strength and courage and hope, and understanding that gives us a lens to see life through. Some of you may not prescribe to what I'm talking about, but what I can tell you is that since my husband passed away over 7 years ago, I have been reading, I have been learning, I have been growing, and what I found for me is this. Perhaps it will work for some of you, perhaps it may not. But the truth that I found is this: my life experiences weren't for nothing. The things that I learnt, that came to me intuitively on how to solve a problem, on how to work through things, for example, changing my mindset, seeing the positive, being empowered with life through a positive energy, I came to understand much later on that those were good things, and that I marveled that God, by his good grace, the universe, whomever it is for you, gave me the opportunity to intuitively receive those messages that helped me to get through, to become resilient and strong, and stand in those strengths with courage. I'm not saying that it is easy in any way. It is worth it to every day take an inventory of how I wanted to live my life, how I wanted to be my best self, how I wanted to show up every day. Recently, Listening to a broadcast by Dr. Joe Dispenza, I heard him say those very words, which helped me to understand me that the gifts that I have been given, I appreciate greatly, because taking inventory of my life is something I started to do when I was experiencing difficulty through a divorce, and I took a class in hopes it would help shift my perspective and my understanding, and I would grow personally. In there was a phrase about taking an inventory of your life. So I started to take a daily inventory of my life to say, how do I want to show up to be my best self? Yes, there are moments that we fall back into the mindset of we're not enough. We feel sorry for ourselves. We judge ourselves harshly. Then how do we, with positivity, pick ourselves up? We have to choose the language that we place inside our mind and our soul and our heart to move forward. And one day, every day, not one day, take one day at a time, one moment at a time. In the quiet, take a moment to have some self-perspective and find that internal light that's in all of us to say, okay, I'm not having the best of days, but I know that I can do better. I know I have strength and courage within me. And we give ourselves the grace of forgiveness and understanding that we all have a chance to do our best. And as long as we have that understanding that we're doing the best that we can, then we know that is sufficient for us in that moment. I want you to think about this for a second. Not recently, let's say this, more likely within the last week or so, let's give it a better timeline. I've been thinking about personal experience. And here are some of the thoughts about personal experience that I have. Everybody in their lifetimes have a ton of personal experiences that they've had to endure, celebrate, and live through. To compare your life to somebody else is unfair, because your life experience is different than everybody else's. In our life experiences, we can have empathy and compassion for somebody else because they may have a similar experience. When we compare, we're diminishing the other person's experience for what it is, because they have had that experience. They have had to grow through that. And the things that they learnt from their experience belong to them because that was their learning and their growth. And when we share our experiences with each other, it seemed to me that we cannot make somebody wrong for what they experience. What we can do is have compassion and understanding in celebrating their achievements and taking from their experiences they've shared what they learnt, that maybe there is a portion of what they've learnt that may be adaptable and work within our own lives, that may be helpful to us. And even if it's not helpful in the moment, taking aboard that knowledge currency will come in handy at a later time, because we can put that on the shelf and go pick it up when a life experience comes along where we need the greatest amount of support and understanding, because we've got that forethought and that understanding prior to the event showing up, which gives us a little bit of a segue and an ease and a flow into that moment, because it'll be, oh my goodness, this kind of sounds or feels familiar. Where have I heard that? Where do I know this? How do I know this? And you'll go looking for that information, and you'll realize you had an experience with someone else that gave you an opportunity to learn and understand and see life through their lens and perspective and learning. I have a philosophy. It comes from my religious background that I believe in anything that is praiseworthy and of good report, which to me means we can learn from each other, we can grow together and share with abundance the knowledge that we have gained, because what you gain and you give away and you share what you have learned, your knowledge currency, your experience still belongs to you. What you went through, what you felt, what you endured, that still belongs to you. But the learning and the growth, that can be shared to enhance and uplift another person's life who may be experiencing something likewise. The reason I share this is because that's my objective in my show, is to share what I've learned, to share what I've gained, in order for you to be inspired and uplifted and to grow and in some way to make a difference. That's my goal, is to make a difference for you, to lift you up beyond where you are at in the moment that you hear this broadcast. It is my hope that something I say will touch your life in a way that it creates positive feelings, emotions, and physical manifestations of energy, which is a little bit like this. Let me share an experience that recently happened. About a week ago, I was getting ready to go on a podcast with a community that had been built since COVID. And I was nervous. When I started going through that process of getting ready for that podcast, there was an initial telephone call and a Zoom meeting to see how I would fit with this podcast, and it was just a conversation. By the time I was done with that initial phone call, the nervousness had left. I was filled with excitement and enthusiasm, and I was ready to go to share my message about my life's journey and what I had gained with some of my experiences. That excitement I wanted to hold on to, like, being away from New Zealand at the moment. I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. And some of the things that I hold on to from my childhood are, fish and chips wrapped up in newspaper. So it was like being that kid holding on to that warm bag of fish and chips wrapped up in newspaper, wanting to rip open the top, pour in the Waddy's tomato sauce and have a good feed. There was that sense of excitement and enthusiasm, like that kid. So the objective of this show is that you will hear something, you will feel something physically in the words that I share that will create hope and an energy to go create action on what's happening in your life. I'm certain for you, it's easy for you to say, well, why would I want to listen to you? Well, you don't have to. I'm not here to cause you any calamity. You don't have to listen. You can do what you will with it. It's up to you. What I do say is, if it's not for you, then share it with somebody else. Share the broadcast with somebody else, because they may need the message that I have to share. I've also learnt that things arrive in your life just at the right time when you need it the most. Sometimes you're not even looking for it or even realizing that you need a certain kind of help and support. And those blessings have been abundant in my life. Let's backtrack for a minute to my depression. I want to share with you that how did I get through my depression? I made a choice to decide to live life and be alive and present to life, and not allow the death of my son be for naught. I watched the very last moments of his life where he fought with all that he had and all the love he had in his heart to be present to me and his dad, to want to stay. But his little body could not sustain him. He was a micro-preemie. And I watched him. His spirit was strong. His body was weak. And he was present to me, his mother. When I decided that I wanted to live life differently, I realized there were things that I had missed. And one of them was remembering what my son gave to me as a gift while he was living. That energy of the past and learning I took with me to create an energy within me to decide to live every day in the now, every day with excitement, enthusiasm, and passion. It also meant to get real about the things that I may struggle with, to not stay there very long, but to process them. I didn't have to stay forever in a difficult challenge. More recently, it was a diagnosis with stage 3 breast cancer. And what I can tell you about that experience is this. All of my experiences leading up to being diagnosed with cancer were a catalyst to help me with the cancer that had shown up and the journey that I would endure because of that diagnosis. I was not my diagnosis. I knew that. And in our next show, we'll talk about how those life changes created an energy flow for me to get through my cancer treatment and keep my perspective on the vision of being alive. I just want to say I hope you've enjoyed your time here with me today, and I hope that I get to spend more time with you. This is Michelle on the flip side, the fun side, the sun side. Thanks for joining me in this moment, this Michelle moment, and don't forget that you are alive, you are here, you are needed, and I believe in you.
This program was produced by and first broadcast on Radio Hawke's Bay, your community access media station. Thanks to New Zealand On Air for making this type of programming possible.